Hey guys, welcome to another week of CIS103. I'm very happy today to have Shelby Bair on our Zoom, and we're going to talk about a number of topics regarding to agency life versus working internally for a brand. Obviously, you guys already know this because I got so many questions from you, and I was really encouraged by that. So I appreciate that. I've never had I think more than 50% of the class submit questions. So that's great. So honestly, Shelby, I don't even know if we're gonna have enough time to ask all these questions. We'll see. So guys, let me introduce you to Shelby, who is joining us today. So Shelby will, let's see, sorry. Shelby's experience is working in various social media roles with both client brands such as PCA Skin, as well as advertising agencies, including her current role as Senior Digital Content Strategist at Lane Terralever, which is here in Phoenix. Shelby is a growth-oriented digital brand strategist with a record of transforming brand perception and performance in CPG, education, and B2B markets through thoughtful end-to-end customer experience, meaningful storytelling, and strategic channel content approaches. Shelby, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I sound so fancy when being introduced. I appreciate it.
Well, you have a nice LinkedIn bio, so I thought that would probably be the best way to do it. So,
Perfect.
Let's see. So let me see what section we want to start with. So I'm going to start off with some questions just about background a little bit. So Zoe, I'm going to queue you up in just a second to ask your questions. But first, let me just start with some of the questions that the students submitted that weren't able to join. So you're submitted the question, or yours on, but she's not able to use her audio. But thank you for submitting this. So she asked, did you always want to be a digital content strategist?
Absolutely not. I always thought I was going to become a professor of medieval literature and medieval art. I went to school for medieval literature. That's what my degree is in. But pretty quickly, to be frank, I entered the job market after I graduated college, and I'm sure all of you are expecting that to hit soon. And reality hit. And I took a real hard look at what I wanted to do, and what I really loved about academics was the idea of defending a thesis or being able to pick something apart, like a piece of literature or art, and say why that works and why people respond to it. And pretty quickly, that turned into what I understood marketing is. I do have a background in marketing. I started with yearbook photography. That kind of led into some extracurriculars throughout college. I did have an internship associated with it. That is something that my photography passion kind of took me through on a media standpoint. But when it came to actual marketing and knowing about, media buys or anything that you kind of touch traditionally in a marketing agency, I had no clue what I was doing. I'd say luck was on my side because I'm a millennial, and social media kind of just really hit its surgence when I was in college. Instagram didn't exist before I was in college. Pinterest, you had to get an invitation, kind of like you do with Clubhouse right now. By the time I was a sophomore, I finally got a Pinterest account. Like, for me, I had experience on my side that I just kind of got naturally. And once I paired that with this sort of passion for writing and thesis is, that's where it really all clicked for me.
And let me actually, I think we should back up a little bit and tell us a little bit more, just like kind of where you came from, how, what school did you go to, and like how'd you get into the agency world just in general?
Sure. So I'm from Phoenix. I'm not a native, but I'll say that this is my hometown. I went to Xavier High School, and then I went to Loyola University Chicago. I originally chose all of that because I really want to pursue film and documentary creation. And for me, it was like, how do I make documentaries about medieval studies? And it was super nerdy. But then when film school wasn't exactly right, the English major and literature became the right move. After I graduated, or also I'll back up a little bit. I worked all through college in retail and sales positions. Those were sort of my money-making jobs. And I also did some internships and volunteer work where I was just kind of, making flyers for a local community center, helping make social posts, excuse me, my email's going off, helping make social posts for, entrepreneurs, things of that nature. When I graduated, I continued to work in retail thinking that I would be going to grad school. And then that's when the sort of hard look came in, when grad school wasn't the option I wanted to pursue. I worked my contacts, to be frank. I really worked everybody I knew. I was living in Chicago at the time. So I started going back to my parents' friends, like who needs social media help. I happen to have a cousin who works in the agency world. She was at Santee, which is no longer an agency anymore. They're part of Reister. And I kind of just started getting in connections from all the people I knew. That was like the very aggressive path I took, was trying to just network. I ended up starting in-house at PCA Skin through a network connection.
Where is PCA headquarters? Just curious.
It's in Scottsdale. So they used to be kind of near Fashion Square. Now they're just a little south of Fashion Square. They're headquartered here. They were started in Arizona while I was there. They got acquired by Colgate Palmolive, which is, Colgate toothpaste, Palmolive soap, huge CPG, Fortune 500. I was there for 2 years, then they got acquired, and then I made it about a year into it before I realized, I really missed that fast-paced world. Originally, when you're trying to get a company acquired, it's kind of like being in a startup. It's very fast-paced. You're constantly just growth marketing, trying to hit huge sales goals so that people want to buy your company. That was what I loved. That was the pace I needed. So that's when I started to look at the agency world. And once again, I just networked the heck out of it. It is, especially in a place like Phoenix, it is a very network heavy community. It's just a small community for that reason. Did I answer your question anymore?
Yeah, I think it did. And you mentioned internships. Let me ask this on my own. Do you think that was important for you to do on your path?
Yeah, I would say so. I was thinking about it when we talked last week to sort of prep it up. I worked for a woman who had just started a website. It was a community for female lawyers. And I don't really remember what made me want to apply for this internship, but I was like, I can do this. I can write a bunch of blog posts. I can write social captions, sure. And she asked me in the interview if I knew anything about coding or website design. And I was like, no, not really. And then I was like, well, you know what? I know how to change the colors in HTML hex code. Like I learned that from MySpace. And I was like, and I know a few small things because I really wanted to change my MySpace background. And that was like the nugget of HTML coding that I knew. And that's kind of where it all clicked. She was like, well, that's applicable. Like, are you kidding me? You know some more HTML than I do. You should have told me that. And she like paused the interview and said, let's start this question over. What do you know about HTML? And that's, to me, I think it was more that question that helped put me on the path, not necessarily the work I was doing. Of course, I learned a lot, but it was I might sound a little big-headed, but a lot of it is really intuitive stuff, especially when you grow up in a digital world. Like, it was really intuitive to know how to make a blog post to me. It was really intuitive to know how to make a Facebook post. It didn't take that much training. So that's where the path started, but I'm certainly think it's worth going beyond just that. I think that's a basic skill that I imagine everyone in this Zoom room has. So then it becomes, what more do you want from that? What is the sort of business drive behind it?
Got it. Okay. All right, so then talking more about marketing and advertising work, I wanted to pass it to Zoe because Zoe submitted a few questions that I thought were really good. Zoe, if you would, take the mic.
Hi, my first question is, what is your favorite or best part of being a a senior digital content strategist?
Hi, Zoe. Thanks for that question. I have so many favorite parts about this. I'll kind of go back to the sort of my love for a thesis. I love journey mapping. That's a pretty specific task that you do when you either look at a sales funnel or sort of a path on a website. It's really about saying, you know, what does a customer, a viewer, an audience member want, when, and why. And to me, it's like a treasure map. It's this sort of Indiana Jones treasure map that I get to bring back that original dream and just figure it out. It's a puzzle. If you like algebra, it's very similar. I love it. I live for journey mapping. That's probably someone in my agency is probably rolling their eyes and calling me a nerd for that, but journey mapping is fun, super fun.
Awesome. And then my second question is, what biggest challenge you face when creating content strategies for brands and companies?
Thank you. I've faced a lot of challenges. I'd say when it comes, and I'm sure Eric can back me up on this, working at an agency, it's say one of the biggest challenges you'll always have is your client, trying to balance what they need versus what they want, versus what they think they want, versus what's real good practice. It's always been, that's a big challenge. I'd say another challenge for me personally, I'm sure that there are plenty of procrastinators in the Zoom room. I am the classic ADHD procrastinator. One of the bigger challenges I have too is just sitting down and writing. Anyone who gets writer's block can experience that. So where I say I love journey mapping, it's because a lot of that is just thinking and theorizing. And the big challenge sometimes is just sitting down and doing all of the sort of thumbs on the keyboard work, and sitting myself down to do something like that. Other challenges, I mean, I think clients are always going to be the biggest challenge. I don't work in account services, but I happen to have very strong relationships and, you know, have conversations with clients every day. It can be really challenging to work really hard on a strategy, try to create like the right path to get the client to agree with you. And a lot of things just end up being out of your power and out of your control. That's a huge challenge to work really hard. And sometimes it's budget, like with the pandemic, a lot of that has affected what clients can say yes to. Sometimes you have to turn in the boring work. It's challenging, but it's part of the job. I think it's all of those things. Thank you for that question. I loved it. Thank you.
A great question. So let me ask you another question. You're talking about digital content strategist or your role. So Leonardo from the class, he submitted a question, and it was, if you had to give a suggestion to people that were going to be in that role of digital content strategist, what main tactics would you say have helped you the most in your role?
Yeah, I'll say my role, I'm a bit of a jack of all trades. So sometimes a master of none. A big piece of it is really understanding everything. We call it being T-shaped. So being really knowledgeable in a specific field. So for me, it is digital content that is expansive to websites, blogs, social media. But then I have to take a look at, I'm not just writing web page copy, but I also need to be really mindful of what my designer or my developer needs. So I'd say some of the tactics is really starting to learn things that are just out of your wheelhouse, just enough to be, my mentor calls it just enough to be dangerous, just enough to be able to throw an idea in there and someone goes, oh, I guess Shelby knows what she's talking about too. That's a tactic that's been really, really important for being, I think, in a strategy role specifically, being able to speak to a lot of different things. I'd say if you want to get really sort of, write this down, and this is the hit list, I'd learn Google Analytics. I would in general just learn e-commerce or just the function of a website. I think that and knowing e-commerce sort of sales funnels is the easiest road into understanding strategy. And you're not always going to have a sales funnel. That's sort of the world I've started leaning into, is not being in sales specific industries. So B2Bs, I work with, public speakers, things of that nature, people who aren't selling something. I think starting with learning how to sell something online is a really good way to just learn how to do all of the tactics.
Great. Yeah, great suggestion. I like that expression, like enough to be dangerous. I think it reminds me, or when you were saying it, reminds me of, just like your whole idea of like you should know a little bit about stuff so you can talk intelligently about it, but also because like you can't what do they say? You can't delegate understanding or comprehension. So like, if you're like, hey, I need you to run the Google Analytics report, but if you don't really know what Google Analytics is or what it does or what the benefits are, you're not going to really know how to judge what they did, or you know what I mean? So I like that. It's really good. Hillary, I wanted to ask you if you are ready to ask your questions.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Hey, Hillary.
So my first question is, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, was what do you think is an advantage of choosing an ad agency social media campaign compared to a in-person or interbusiness?
Yeah, thank you. Are you asking sort of like, should a company choose to hire an agency versus doing it themselves? Or
yeah.
It's a great question. I'll start by saying I don't think that there's a wrong answer to this. The big thing to sort of remember is agencies are expensive. You either put your money towards hiring somebody to do it, like an agency, or you have to work internally with your talent. And in a lot of cases, internal resources are tight. When I was an in-house social media manager, I was taking photos like right there on that white sheet, with a camera that I have had since high school, So there are a lot of benefits to going to an agency, and I'd say the biggest one is quality of work. You get people whose life is creating graphics and photography and all of that. The big downside is just money. In-house agencies, though, or rather in-house marketing departments, some people call them in-house agencies. The advantage you get there is you have somebody who's really knowledgeable of your brand. And I think that to say the least, there's no wrong answer. I think you get a lot of pros and cons with both of them. I guess the question is, how much time do you want to spend on it, and how much money are you willing to not have to spend time on it?
Right. Hillary, go ahead. You had a second question as well. Correct?
Yeah, so my other question would be, what has been your favorite business to work for, and what was the biggest thing you took away from the experience?
Oh, I love that question. I'm gonna have to go with PCA Skin. I'll start with PCA in general because I worked with them in-house for 3 years. I can't complain about all the free skincare I got, to say the first part, but I learned so much because we were in-house. We had very little resources. We were working really hard to grow really fast with a shoestring budget. And in that case, I also learned, how to sell something online, all the different channels and all the different tactics I could do to try to sell one specific product. So you get to test all of the different waters. As far as outside of that and in the agency or in my freelance world, I'll say that my favorite one so far is okay. I just recently did a website for Thunderbird School of Management. They're a grad school out of ASU, but they are this very large sort of international situation. They are also partnering with Paris Climate Accord, the UN, all of their very, high up there kind of grad students who are there. We had to get a website together very quickly in time for the inauguration and in time for the Paris Climate Accord to be rejoined, about global carbon removal task force. And we basically were given like the notes on the back of a napkin from the dean and said, here's all the kind of information we have. Can you make a website out of it in the next few weeks? And it was challenging. It was fun, but I'd say the biggest benefit I got out of it is I've always wanted to work in sort of a political situation, and I got to do it for something that I cared about, which is carbon removal and environmental policy. So for me, it was just a passion project, and I was happy to work on it. Thanks, Hillary. Great questions.
I'm gonna jump back to PCA because we've talked a little bit about that. And Elena from the class, she sent some questions into me. So there's two questions I have specific about PCA. So she said, what were some of the biggest lessons you learned while working for PCA Skin or directly with a company?
Yeah, I think in general, being in-house, I learned the value of project management and organization. I'd say that was when I left PCA, that was like the only thing that I would like, give me a project manager. I don't care whatever the process is, at least there is a process. And when you work in-house, a lot of times those processes disappear, or it's very unorganized, or you're dealing with a lot of competing priorities or people who have priorities but don't have anybody to tell them what needs to be a priority. So I learned how to do a lot of work in a short amount of time, and learned how to sort of balance my own books, if you will, as far as my time goes. The other thing that was really a valuable lesson there was the value of quality and like putting in your time. My mentor now started maybe 3 months after I had started. And I just remember having sort of a heart-to-heart with her at the beginning. And she had come from the agency world and joined us in-house. And she taught me this idea of everything needs to be ready. Like everything needs to be ready as if it's going to be published right now. Spend your time putting your commas in there, spend your time formatting your spreadsheets, spend all of that time, because you don't know at a moment's notice when you need to pass it off to somebody or it needs to go live. And that applies to everything that I do now. I try to do things sort of right the first time, because you spend a lot of time revising. In an agency world, when you have clients reviewing stuff, you spend a lot of time revising. So for me, I think the biggest lesson was definitely learning to take the time to do high quality work.
If I can ask a follow-up, sorry, on that, like, what are some of any software you recommend or anything like that, as far as like what helps you get things right quickly?
Yes. Well, I do a lot of writing, I'll say that much. And I had a client who was very similar to my mentor with making sure everything was just right. One of the biggest tools I use now it's an online tool. It's completely free. It's called a Hemingway app. And it is a tool that basically helps you identify when your sentences are too long, too wordy, passive voice, you're writing at a 12th grade reading level, we need to bring it down to 5th grade. That has been truly just like a lifesaver with getting things right. I've also learned to rely on other people to read it. do not like be afraid to send somebody something to proofread. Those are two very free resources, are Other Humans and that specific app. Any other software I can think of is honestly, I think that anything as far as getting it right, you can always do it free. That's another thing. There's always something free out there. There's no need to spend money on the fanciest gadget in the world, because your two hands can do it.
A great suggestion, Hemingway. I'll have to share that with the class too.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so the second question from Elena about PCA. She said, do the things you learned while working with PCA Skin apply to the work that you're currently doing with Lane Terralever or LT? What are the main differences between working for those two companies?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to ask sort of a lot of the things I've been trying to say is, I'd say, so the biggest difference is, of course, is the organization. And I'll get into the differences between what that was and versus how an agency runs. There's a very different business model that was a bit of a learning curve for me. But some of the things that I learned at PCA really mostly apply to my clients. So we talked about journey mapping at the beginning, and sales funnels and churn and driving leads and emails. Those are all things that I learned honestly through sort of this sort of e-commerce boot camp at PCA. As a social media manager, I was responsible for what I was posting, driving traffic to the site, and being sure that then people who got there wanted to actually purchase it. So I learned a lot about audiences. Skincare is a good example because you have people with acne, people with wrinkles, very different audiences. You've got teenagers versus their parents. So that became a lesson in how do you talk to the right people at the right time and where. And then also just, we talked about it, just sort of testing the waters and everything. How can I sell here? Instagram shoppable pins, things of that nature started popping up. And you just start to learn, how do people interact with digital spaces? I think that's the most important thing to understand. Is not necessarily what's the ROI on an Instagram ad. It's why does somebody go on Instagram? Who is the typical Instagram user? Why would they follow me? And then sort of how do they continue to buy into me as a brand? Not necessarily how do I get them to purchase right now? Do you want me to start talking about the difference between an agency and an in-house? I think we've talked about it a bit.
Yeah, I've got some other ones. Let me have Andrea ask some questions. I think she had some questions about strategy. Andrea, are you able to ask your questions?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I was preparing a snack, and that's why my camera's off. Let me just pull that up.
You had a question about storytelling, and I think
yeah,
strategy.
So when it comes to storytelling for products or services, how do you decide the narrative of that? How do you determine if it's going to be informative, personal, educational, or any other type?
Yeah, thank you for that. I feel like I need to put my glasses on now too, because we match anyway. So when it comes to storytelling for a brand, I imagine maybe brand strategists will tell you this. It always goes back to that brand framework, the mission, vision, values, the why the company exists and why this product or what it's offering is worth it to the customer. I don't at the current time create brand frameworks, but I work pretty closely with those who do. And for me, I rely really heavily on that. I think that's the smartest way to approach when it comes to digital storytelling, as I'll call it. So getting a brand, I'm trying to think of a sort of an example off the top of my head, but we have a stevia client, and part of their brand is to be sweet in the sense that sort of like a Sour Patch candy. I don't really know how to describe it, but you know, that then turns into a whole plethora of ways to talk about sweetness. You know, is it the sweet life, things of that nature. When you talk about, are we going to be informative, are we going to be personal, educational, all that, I always like to create voice and tone documents and sort of a personification statement to help talk about, you know, who is this brand if they had to all of a sudden turn into a human? Like, what would this human be? What would this archetype be? And then from there, you have to ask yourself, you know, well, why would somebody approach that person for that information? So I just wrote one where we suggested that the brand be sort of like your favorite high school science teacher, one who's really informative, somebody you go to for education and you trust the knowledge, but you also are there because they're entertaining and they help make that fun. I love creating personification statements for that reason. And then the last thing I have to hit on it is, you know, what are the business goals? It is very important. It's always there. Are you selling something? Are you trying to get somebody to donate or to attend an event, or just trust you? That's pretty big for PR and sort of the public speakers or thought leaders. You know, how do you establish that trust too? And I mean, what do people want from you? That's kind of the biggest question, is why would they come to you and how do you be there for what they want? Thank you for that. I love that question.
Yeah, I really liked your answer. Thank you. And then my next question was, when you are creating marketing goals, strategies, and content, what would you say is the ratio of being driven by numbers and statistics versus more emotional and personal based experiences?
Well, I'm sure you can probably already tell. Thank you for that question. Probably guess what my answer is, and that's feeling. I am much more of a theorist and a, you know, asking the question why. And I think that data needs to back that up, of course, but I am definitely on the side of human interaction and what is just common sense of what humans would want. A good example of that is, you know, where does your brand need to be on Facebook or TikTok? And the question is, why would somebody go on TikTok and look at your brand versus why would somebody go on Facebook and look at your brand? It very much depends. And you have to make those decisions based on the data you know about the platforms, but then what you know about people. I've brands who, I'm sure you've seen them, they post on social or they're on TikTok and you're just like, is TikTok over now because you're here? I guess it is. If I get one more freeform ad, I'm going to scream. Like those kinds of things. You have to, I mean, we all see advertisements that go live and you're just like, what are all these gatekeepers? Why is Kendall Jenner giving somebody a Pepsi and they're saying that that's social justice? Like, there are hundreds of people who have hundreds of data points that can prove why that ad should have gone live. And it just takes one person to be a human and say, what would a human say about this? Because at the end of the day, we're just humans speaking to humans. I think that's, I will always go back to it. The media people and like my analytics team are probably like, no, but we are what we are. I'm not going to deny that one.
I wanted to go back to the whole agency versus in-house agency or in-house marketing and advertising department. What do you think? And I ask this because a lot of the students could be going in marketing and advertising and could be looking for their first roles. What would you recommend? Should they start at an agency or should they start at a company on the brand side?
I mean, I'm pretty partial to the way I've done it. Agency life is not easy. When I told my mentor I was leaving to go to an agency, she was like, sit down, we have to have a talk just so you know what you're going into. And agency life is very hectic. And I think might be a good way to sort of touch on that business model, because at an agency, your product is the work that you can deliver. It's not how many, SPFs am I selling? It's how many hours did Shelby work this week, and did the client get what they want? So can we bill them for it? If anyone in the audience is a freelancer and bills hourly, that's essentially the same business model. So I'd say there's a bit of a learning curve in the sense that you're busy. You're really busy at an agency. The work doesn't end ever. It's like you would go to sleep and you're like, I technically could be studying. I technically could be doing homework right now. It's very similar life. I think it's very similar to being a college student, to be honest. So technically, I mean, I think you'll get very different experiences about either of them. I think going in-house is a really good way to learn everything at once. I think it's a really, really good way to understand via one deep case study versus trying to make it work on a lot of different brands, because once a brand hires an agency, you're expected to kind of have all those case studies in your back pocket to have understood how it works for other people. So you can learn a lot at both of them. I'm very partial to starting at an in-house first. Risk reward on that one too. I'd say that you get a lot more learning time in-house. That's for sure, at least what I've seen in my experience.
I had a really relevant question that came from David in our class, and basically talking about the coronavirus pandemic and how that affects marketing and advertising. So David asked, during the pandemic, how do you reach people digitally? How is it different than strategies used before the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. I kind of had to dig into it for a minute when I saw that come through, because in a digital world, nothing really changed for us. The big difference was we didn't have as much happening outside of the world or outside of the digital space that we could lean on. So for instance, we had a client who was you could completely self-pay online for an annuity, which is sort of like an insurance policy. It was the very first sort of self-service form of it. We had originally relied on billboards, radio advertisement, and those two things require people to commute to work and to listen to the radio while they're commuting to work. So when the pandemic hit and everybody started working from home, we kind of had to take a step back. I'm very fortunate to say that, my work has not been interrupted. If anything, it's been extra busy, because a lot of companies are now reinvesting in digital tactics because it's not going away. And we knew it wasn't going away, but we had fate on our side to force a lot of companies realize that it wasn't going to go away. So I think the biggest difference has been, what we can rely on that isn't digital, word of mouth, seeing somebody wearing a logo, things of that nature, just like so much impression opportunities did leave the atmosphere for us. So we had to think about how to target a little bit more specifically in our digital media advertisement, how to break through the noise now that everybody's online. And then also something that we're very mindful of in the content side, that not other people stay mindful of. It's probably most relevant and prevalent in our world on social media is when to shut up, to be honest, when to not say anything. We absolutely, after we saw all of the demonstrations for justice in Minneapolis and all across the country, we had to take a minute and re-educate clients and re-educate a lot of people to understand that you don't have to always be saying something. Sometimes you just need to listen. And sometimes you just, as a brand, need to learn how to receive, not always talk to. That was definitely one of the other bigger challenges for us in the digital world.
Right, and Shelby, I've got time for two more questions. So one was about strategy, and the final one's going to be just general advice. So last one about strategies. I know you've worked for a number of different types of companies, and this is doesn't matter if you're working in-house or with the agency. But in your opinion, is there a difference between the way that you create strategy for a big brand versus a small brand? You know, you could say, you know, a small brand being like, you know, local versus like a national.
Absolutely, and thanks for that question. There's a huge difference, and I think that always relies on name recognition. A small brand that you don't necessarily have the biggest reach, or people don't really know you yet or know what you stand for, that strategy is going to be a lot more about establishing what we call brand equity and brand identity. You know, what do people recognize from your brand, and how much value do they recognize in that? So it's the difference between Dunkin' Donuts and Bosa Donuts. You know, Bosa's, if you're in Phoenix, is a really great local donut shop that has a lot of brand equity in Phoenix, but not necessarily everywhere else. I think it has great brand equity here. But then you have Dunkin' Donuts, who their strategy is different. Their strategy is now to really establish and become synonymous with something. For Dunkin', it's, I can't remember, on the go, something about gotta have your Dunkin'. And it's about an on the go convenience for your coffee, your sweets, just whatever you need. And you approach it differently. You know, you have different people to talk to for sure, and they have very different perceptions of what your brand is.
All right. And then just wrapping it up, I have one final question, and this is from Ur in the class. And the question, just general advice, you know, as I mentioned, a lot of the students are, you know, maybe transferring to ASU and maybe going to the workforce, maybe working in marketing and advertising, maybe taking their first jobs, might be looking at agencies versus in-house brands. So in general, what is some advice that you would have? This is from Ur in the class. What is some advice that you would have when looking for a job without currently having the degree or having, I guess, having the experience? How do they get started?
Well, thanks for that question. I mean, I'm right there with y'all. How I approached it was I just started doing a lot of what we call spec work. So faking it with different, you know, companies. I fell in love with a certain brand, and I just started making fake magazine advertisements for them and sort of campaigns. That's one thing that you can do to just show that you know how to do it. I think the spec work for a portfolio is really useful. The other side of it is not discounting the skills and the experience you have right now. I mentioned that I was working retail, and that's basically sort of the only real paid job experience I had. To me, I learned really well in those retail experiences how to sell specific products. I learned how to talk to people in a way that they bought from me. I had worked at Bloomingdale's at the time. I learned how to manage clients. Like, I would call people when new pants came in and convince them to come shop with me. It's very applicable experience no matter where you are. You just have to pull back away from the industry and like what your hands are full with. I wasn't just steaming clothes, I was representing a brand. That's one thing. I'll say that right now. You can work at Starbucks, you can work, you know, wherever. Everywhere you're working, you're learning how to represent that brand, and you're learning how to work for an organization in a way that that organization wants to be represented. You're seeing brand collateral, you're seeing how it functions. You know, the logo on the Starbucks menu is now in the Starbucks training manual, and you can see all these really awesome examples of branding at work. So just your experience, you may not have technically a marketing degree or technically a marketing job, but you are being exposed to marketing left and right, and you are learning how to use it. So just, you've got it. I guarantee every single one of you has more than enough experience to become a marketer. You just have to hack into like what that actually means when you have to do it on the flip side.
Fantastic. Nice, nice parting words. I do appreciate that. Shelby, I really, again, I do want to thank you for taking the time to talk to the class. For the class, I think it's so beneficial when they can learn from somebody that's out there doing it. And anyway, I'm going to share your LinkedIn bio with them, and of course the link. So
please. And the only other thing I was asked to say is we have internships opening up constantly at Lane Terra Lever. We are a very flexible work program. We really, really love college students, and we hire in a way that we want people to work with us full time. An intern isn't somebody who gets us coffee. An intern is somebody who's right there next to us. We're training them to eventually be full time. That being said, I was asked to sort of plug some LT internships around the summertime. We do a big hiring blitz. So please be on the lookout, connect with me, follow me on Instagram, keep in touch because we are always looking for young talent.
very cool. Should I, what link should I share with them for like the internships?
I will send it to you. I'll follow up right now.
Okay.
And have you
Yeah, perfect. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining. Thank you, Shelby, once again. Have a great week, guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much, y'all. It was great questions.
Bye, guys.